if you allow me, I'll also read the short bio of Burcu Alkan, and then we'll move to Çimen Günay Erkol's bio. Burcu Alkan would have talked with a title of Politics of World Literature Theory and Turkish Literature as World Literature. This is a very important and current and very political, cultural and political issue. Dr. Burcu Alkan is an EUM Fellow of the Forum Transregionale Studien, Berlin, and an Honorary Research Fellow at the University of Manchester. She's the author of Promethean Encounters, representation of the intellectual in the modern Turkish novel of the 1970s. She published it in 2018, and she co-edited with Çimen Günay Erkol, Dictionary of Literary Biography, volume 373, Turkish Novelists since 1960 in 2013, and its second series, volume 379 in 2016. Most recently, they also co-edited Turkish Literature as World Literature together in 2021. Dr. Alkan specializes in comparative literature with a focus on Turkish literature, and her current research interests are within the field of medical humanities, particularly in the relationship between literature and psychiatry, sciences of the mind, and mental health. I hope she gets well in a very short time, but we have another important colleague, Professor Çimen Günay Erkol here. She's at Özyeğin Üniversitesi in Istanbul, and her talk's title will be Turkish Literature in the World Scene, Politics of Translation. Professor Deryay also made an introduction to this issue through Albanian and Turkish relationships. Çimen Hoca's CV is also very impressive. She obtained her PhD at Leiden University, Department of Literary Studies in 2008, and she has been teaching at Özyeğin University since its foundation in 2008. It is one of the most important Turkish foundation universities. And she's acting as co-editor and board member of Masculinities, the Journal of Identity and Culture, since 2013. In 2016, her PhD manuscript was published by Central European University Press under the title Broken Masculinities, Solitude, Alienation, and Frustration in Turkish Literature After 1970. Çimen Günay Erkol's research agenda includes analyzing power imbalances with men and masculinities at the explicit focus. Platform is yours, Çimen.
Thank you, Hocam. I would like to start by another thank you to the University of Cyprus for this invitation for this beautiful symposium. Let me share my screen so you will be able to see my slides, and let's see if we have any problems. I'll start with an introduction, and I will talk about, in fact, both my talk and both Burcu Hoca's talk, they were based on our introduction in this book, edited volume, Turkish Literature as World Literature. So if you are wondering what Burcu Hoca would be talking about, you could perhaps have a look at the introduction of the edited book. I was, of course, planning to build on her talk, but since she's absent, I'm not going to exploit that, and I'm not going to take the 2 chairs in this panel, but I added some slides. As you can see, my orange slides are as if Burcu's talk would give us this theoretical floor in the discussion of how political is world literature. So I will talk about the theoretical discussions, and then I will move on to my part. My part, in fact, starts with this term, bibliomigrancy of Turkish literature, and then I will move to the theory and praxis of translation, and I will talk about TEDA project. So thanks to Adriatic Hoca, now we have an idea about what's going on in TEDA, rights and wrongs, and perhaps we can discuss this in depth, and then I will have the conclusive part. This is the edited volume I'm talking about, Turkish Literature as World Literature. We had 12 chapters in this book, and we tried to cover a very wide time frame, starting from the early modern Ottoman times, the 19th century late Ottoman times, the Republican nation-state Turkey times, and the new Turkey times. So, of course, the new Turkey here refers to post-2000 or perhaps post-Erdogan Turkey is sometimes called as New Turkey. There is still a debate if there is a New Turkey, so I'm not going into that discussion right now here, but we tried to cover a wide historical frame of Turkey in literature. And then if you have a look at the chapters, some names, of course, come to the front. It is, I'm afraid, impossible to cover all the important names of Turkish literature in a single edited book. And just like in every edited project, this project had deadlines. So we announced a call for papers and we received several applications and we had to choose. We were expecting, of course, applications on names such as Aziz Nesin, Yaşar Kemal, Nazım Hikmet, and then any other international names of Turkish literature. But unfortunately, no applications on Aziz Nesin arrived. Several others' names are missing here, of course, and we are very well aware of this. But we were able to cover Yunus Emre, for example. There is a chapter in this book on women travelers during the Ottoman times, European and Ottoman women traveling and sharing their experiences with each other. We have a chapter on Halide Edip and her trip to India. So the influence of Edip in India was being discussed there. We have 3 chapters on Nazım Hikmet. Nazım Hikmet is the star of this book. Because not only his influence in Greece, but also his influence in the east parts of, let's say, the world, in Persian literature, in Arabic literature, in that type of Eastern cultures and languages are also explored. And then we have chapters on Orhan Pamuk, Elif Shafak, and Aslı Erdoğan. Now, our aim for this book was to understand Turkish literature as world literature, and the introduction makes an emphasis on this proposition as. So Turkish literature is just there, nothing changes. I mean, people are writing books are there, we have a compact image there, but when you say Turkish literature as world literature, what are you changing? What makes Turkish literature a world literature? In fact, when nothing has been changed in the ingredients at all. So the emphasis of the introduction, therefore, moves on the theoretical discussions of world literature. What is in this proposition? If you want to answer this question, you need to talk about the positionality. So how do we position Turkish literature, and then it becomes a world literature? So just because we started with that question, we wanted to include chapters that discuss the impact of Turkish literature on world literature. Until now, I'm afraid, when comparative studies are being carried out, the hegemonic position there is the influence of Western literatures on Turkish literature. That is being explored, that is being studied. But the impact of Turkish literature on Western literatures, that was kind of an empty space. So do we have no impact at all, or do we have perhaps little impacts? The discussion on world literature in theory gives us, it has given us since a long time, this major-minor dichotomy. So there are major works of literature and there are minor works of literature. But then in terms of the discussions on canons, David Damrosch came with the tripartite discussion, not this dualism, but now we have three concepts to discuss world literature. We have canons, and then we have hypercanons. After all those years, we still have some top names in our lists of literary works. And then when we start to discover the history of this, the political history of this canonization, we are trying to make counter canons. But Damrosch reminds us that although we keep making counter canons, the hypercanon is still there. If let's say if it's the Western works are making the hypercanon, perhaps via Turkish literature and via other national literatures, we are working on counter canons, but still the hypercanon is there. And then we have the shadow canons as well. So we are talking about, when we talk about world literature, we are still talking about aesthetics, literary theory, politics at all, but global book market is also a part of the discussion. So we were trying to ask in this volume, does this global book market, the conditions of the market, do they really allow different voices? So another theoretical discussion here comes from Franco Moretti and his idea of distant reading, because Moretti thinks close reading is not the point here in understanding world literature. When you do the close reading, you close yourself to the other to the peripheries of your thing, and then you focus on your nation-state literature. Perhaps you choose your text, you work on that text. But in fact, if you want to understand world literature, you need to have another lens of distant reading. So according to Moretti, world literature is a complex territory. And of course, reading is a good thing, he says, but it's not the solution, because you cannot read all works in all languages. So you will be the expert in some of the works, but of course, the other works won't be accessible to you. So the translation of works is the major problem here in world literature. Accessibility is our number one problem. And Burcu was, of course, planning to discuss Pascal Casanova here today, her World Republic of Letters. Casanova's idea of World Republic of Letters has Paris at the center. So perhaps this is a fresh look at world literature in some sense, at least giving us the impression that Paris can be a center and then somewhere else can be a center as well. Istanbul can be a center, perhaps. But then again, this look at world literature is again having that very Eurocentric approach at its core. So Rosan Diagolov's answer here can be of concern. Diagolov discusses People's Republic of Letters. So instead of Paris or instead of Central European, big cities at the center. Here he suggests to have a look at the Soviet experience for the international left, for example. How about the Soviet cities as new centers? So those were our inspirations in asking questions about Turkish literature and how Turkish literature can be world literature. We wanted to return to Erich Auerbach's famous dictum. He says, our philological home is the earth. This means every language is important and every text is important to us. All of us have the same home. So let me now start. How do we treat our home? In my discussion, this bibliomigrancy term has some center of gravity. It means it refers to the movement of books from one language to another. But as Adriatic Hoca just a second ago explained how Turkish literature is getting translated into Albanian via French. So sometimes your book becomes a migrant in one language, but first it becomes a migrant in another language, and then it gets transferred to the third one. So this is a long journey. And then we need to know every detail of this journey. He is right. A good translator, because you're giving a very important work to the hands of other people, but who are those people? And how are they acting on this text? The term here belongs to Van Katmani, and he discusses the migrancy of books in the close company of the migration of people in the post-colonial world. So just like people, books are migrating from one country to another, and we need to watch this closely. And in his book, he starts with his research on early Orientalist collections, and he moves on the Nazi magazine Weltliteratur, which was in the experience of European Digital Library, of course, constitutes a part of his study as well. And Mani reveals that the political foundations for a history of world literature that is at once a philosophical ideal, a process of exchange between different cultures, different languages, a mode of reading, and a system of classification. So this was the science we were aiming. But then the book discusses the idea of migrancy, from moving the focus from the academic to the general reader. And when you move your focus from the university to the public sphere, you can see that he says in his book, you can easily see that world literature is culturally determined, historically conditioned, and politically charged. So this was my ground zero. Here in this conference, we are discussing the relation of politics with literature, and then we know from ground zero that literature can be politically charged, of course, but our reading, recoding, our approach to world literature is almost always politically charged. And there are also other important names here in terms of discussing world literature theories, but overall, now the discussion boils down to the fact that literature's worldliness is somehow related to its circulation in the globe. So it is important for a book to have a place in the global literary market. And the aim is always to reach to greater audiences. So the problem then moves from being a problem of philosophy to a problem of popularity. To reach greater audiences means you need more and more people asking for your expertise, right? So our philological home is the earth, of course, is the returning point that we are turning to. But we need to discuss the globalization of this book culture, reading culture. I want to mention now a few anecdotes from the Turkish experiences in the world book market. Here you can see Müge Gürsoy Sökmen. She is one of the most experienced publishers who has, I think, more than 30 years of experience in promoting Turkish literature to world literary markets. And in a roundtable organized by Swedish Pen in 2002, she has a speech. She had a speech there, and in our book we made a reference to her speech because she complains about two things, two important barriers she complains about. The first one is the prejudice barrier. This is a cultural prejudice, so the hidden Orientalism, let me say, in the European literary circles about the Orient or what is not European. And then the second one was the quota barrier. So when she says the publishers agree to publish one important name, let's say from Turkey, when you go to them with a second file, they say we have already published one, and that's all, that's enough. So in fact, there's no quota, of course, but they impose artificial quotas, she says. And the prejudice barrier, these are her words. The European publishers, she says, are expecting good literary documents of family violence, wife beating, harassment from the violent Orient. I mean, if you're going there with a book that has such stories in it, then you have more rate of acceptance, let's say, in the world literary market. But if you are going there with alternative stories, then you need to prove you are worth publication. So not coming from major European languages is the main problem of literature from Turkey. But she adds the prejudice barrier and the quota barrier on top of these. So my discussion here is we have theories of world literature, we have theories of translation, and then we have the praxis. Lots of people are working on very hard texts. They are giving their years and years of hard work on certain texts, and then they are going to publishers, and they are facing with walls. So we need to work on the praxis part as well, as much as we work on the theory part. In the case of Turkish literature, the migration, the bibliomigrancy of Turkish literature into European sphere, it was a joint effort of translators and academics, I must say. So these names, some of them may be familiar to you. Güzin Dino, for example, was the assistant to Erich Auerbach during his stay in Istanbul. And in 1973, she published a very important history of Turkish literature, La jeunesse du roman turco du 19e siècle. But when she was writing about Turkish literature in French, none of the books she was talking about was available in translation. So she's talking about, let's say, Ahmet Mithat Efendi and then Tanzimat writers. Very few of those names were available in languages other than Turkish, but the critics, but the academics are starting to write on them. And this is how they are trying to kind of open a door to the European sphere. Similarly, Talat Alman in 1976, when he published Modern Turkish Drama, he was in academic in the States, in the United States. And he was spending great energy on plays, drama, which is in Turkey. I mean, there are limited number of critics working on drama. Drama is really the least analyzed genre, I think, in Turkey. But he was writing in English on those texts. And even though those texts were not available in translation, the academic writing was going on. So this kind of opened the door, this kind of forced the door into translation, and then translators, of course, joined the effort. I'm not able to give lots of names here, just to mention a few. I'm giving you the names, but of course there are great number of very powerful, very strong translators from Turkish to other European languages. For example, Nermin Menemencioğlu and Fahiriz, they published the Penguin Book of Turkish Verse. Again, without the poems, books as books, they are not published in English, but in parts and pieces, they are taking from books of verses from the books of Turkish poets, and then they are producing edited books of the Turkish verse. This is how we made an entrance. Now, after 1980s, those kind of efforts, of course, increased. Ahmet Evin's book, The Origins and Development of the Turkish Novel, is just an initial experience here. But the theory of Turkish novel, the history of Turkish novel is being exposed in the period 1980s. But TEDA arrived quite late, I'm afraid, I must say. So people are translating on their own, trying to reach the publishers on their own, and suddenly the Turkish state, Turkish government initiated the TEDA project. This is the cultural grant project for translations. And the project kicked off in 2005. And I will give you some numbers here, but I'm afraid the website of TEDA is a bit mysterious. They're not very open. They are giving you numbers, but in fact, there must be more numbers on what's going on, and there must be clear information about the selection process, etc. I was not able to find them on this website, but having a look at the 15 years, I'm afraid it's not possible to say that. I mean, this gave us the energy we have been looking for in terms of translation of Turkish literature. There are a number of works translated. There are a number of works being granted, but not yet published. So I don't know about the, of course, because of the economic problems in Turkey, now the publishers in Turkey are experiencing serious problems, and there are similar problems around Turkey as well. So perhaps this is part of the problem here, but not all grants are realized into books yet. The numbers on their website are interesting, because when you have a look at the grants which they use to promote Turkish literature, the number of applications from Bulgaria and Germany you will see them on the top two, and Macedonia is the third on the list. This means, I mean, your physical neighbors are interested in your literature. So Bulgaria requires, Bulgarian publishers are making applications to Turkish government's grant project, and they are getting the rights to publish Turkish books in Bulgarian. Germany is another interesting country here. Of course, we have lots of Turks as German citizens living in the country. So this can be an explanation. Perhaps some of these books are being used as textbooks at schools, etc. But if you have a look at English, for example, in terms of language, you need to have a look at the table on the right. It's only in the eighth place. Here in the United States is at the 10th place on the left. So we will be, I'm afraid, coming back to the discussion of lingua francas, right? For a while it was French in terms of Turkish literature. In the morning session, again, we discussed this being vocal in French, and then in other languages was a discussion for Tanzimat writers. But after that, the lingua franca, if there is one, of course, is, I think, English. But the Turkish literature in English is relatively still in very small amounts, and the TEDA project showed that. I mean, there is not no interest, but little interest from American publishers. There are research papers on what has been going on. So translators, experts on English literature are working on Turkish literature as translators. Almost everyone I know from English literature departments have a book, a verse or something in their hands trying to translate into English. But then again, I'm afraid we're coming to the same problem. They are having lots of high quality translations with them, but the publishers are putting that language barrier and then quota barrier, and then it becomes a wall in front of those people, in front of those high-working people. Şafak Orzum and Başak Ağın's article is a recent article in 2021. They published in Translation Review, and their work builds on Saliha Paker and Melike Yılmaz's article. Sariya Hoca and Melike Hoca's article deal with the translation of Turkish literature into English, but they covered 1949 and 2004. So that is an interesting period to see. There are high numbers of translated works in some years. And Şafak and Başak's paper showed that after 2004, you can see that the number of works being translated, in some years there are rises, in some years the number of works being translated gets in lower numbers, they drop. Some are stable, but again, we I'm afraid are not only should not be only interested in numbers, but we need to know and ask what is being translated, right? Because TEDA works, at least what they say on their website is this: every foreign publisher can approach to TEDA with a project. So they need to pick a book as their project, and they need to arrange the translator and everything. And then if they make their case, so I'm ready to publish this book, this person is going to translate it, and this will be the end product, and this will be published at some due date. The TEDA committee just screens the applications and gives the grant. So we need to know how many people applied to TEDA with what type of projects, and how many of them got accepted and how many of them got rejected. But I'm afraid their website do not provide us with such details. I took these screenshots from Şafak and Başak's article, The Chronological Bibliography of Turkish Literature in English Translation, and I just got the beginning of their time period and the end of their time period. So these are not just random choices. But in 2004, have a look at, please, the names of the books, the names of the people, and then the names of the publishers, because you will see some of the books in 2004 are published by Istanbul publishers. So Istanbul publishers are publishing books in English. When the European publishers are not approachable, Istanbul publishers are taking the chance to publish books in English. So those translations, translated by, there are names perhaps familiar to you. Some of these people are established translators. Some of these people are perhaps just academics working on two languages, and they are trying to make a favor to Turkish literature, their favorite writers, for them to access other literary spheres. But this was the case. And please have a look at the last years, 2019 and 2020. There are now university presses. For example, in 2019, we have Halit Ziya Uşaklıgil, a very important name in Turkish literary history, and his memoirs are translated. The publisher here is now the university press. So this means when this publication appears, perhaps it will be easier for it to enter into the world of academia. Perhaps it will be course material, because of coming out of a university press will make it more prestigious, and it will be perhaps at the center of some research in those universities and departments. And that's how, as I mentioned in the beginning, the joint effort of academics, translators, and critics, I see that as a very good initiative to make Uşaklıgil's literary history, Uşaklıgil's literary productions as at the center of literary research. And their research here is cut at the end of 2020. But of course, translation is a never-ending business and it's going on. So perhaps a new article will cover the previous years. Now we are in 2022. There are two more years on top of this, and I'm not sure, I don't have with me the list of titles translated into English, but I'm sure translation is going on. So let me conclude. We now have accessibility as the number one problem here, because if you cannot make a text accessible in other languages, it's hardly a word literature. You need to make it accessible for people to read. But is it enough? So is making a text available in English, in American English or British English, in German or Dutch, French, Italian, Central European languages, is it enough to make it word literature? And are we going to discuss this genre problem as well? Because sometimes the stock market, the global market, the book market has some rules, And when you accept books that favor those rules, you will be ending up, I'm afraid, books of some same tastes. Popular books often have similar rhetoric. They have the same patterns, etc. So when you focus on certain genres, or when you expect this popularity, the ability to reach greater audiences, I'm afraid you will be ending up with similar texts. And this is, of course, another criticism by Erich Auerbach. This was mentioned by him as well. World literature, when you try to make everything world literature, then it becomes similar. Every local color blends itself into a worldly color, but this means in terms of the stock market, in terms of the global market, this means you are producing something to be sellable, and this means erasing their peculiarities. So we need, in my opinion, more scholarly discussion. We emphasized that in our introduction as well, more scholarly discussion on the peripheries. And of course, the periphery means it doesn't guarantee to not being another center. Just because you're in periphery, it doesn't mean that you're different. Sometimes in the peripheries, new centers are being built. So we need to discuss what's going on in peripheries, but we need to discuss this again with critical attention to the power dynamics in the peripheries. I will conclude with positive remarks. So this is just the beginning. We need to depoliticize and then repoliticize world literature. This book is by Ian Almond. It's recently published. And Almond's book is on Turkish literature, but it is also on Mexican and Bengal literatures. So what is interesting here is when you decolonize the theory, when you depoliticize and repoliticize the theory, then it becomes possible to have a look at different nation-state literatures from the same perspective. So what happened in Turkey perhaps is similar to what happened in Mexico, and what happened in Bengal is somehow relatable to what's going on in the other parts of the world. I think we need to analyze in our literature and other nation-state literatures in comparison with each other. And this comparison doesn't mean a comparison with the centralized West, but a comparison with the non-West must be perhaps a bit of our discussions. Thank you very much for listening to me.